Bruchim haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Nun Ches Amud Beis. 16 lines from the bottom, a little bit more than halfway down the Amud. The Gemara previously explained to us that if there's a bell that's attached to the garment of an Eved, he can go out with that bell because that bell, even if it does not have an inbal inside of it, it doesn't have the clapper, the ringer inside, is going to be an ornament, a tachshit for the Eved. And therefore he can go out with it. We're not worried about it's going to fall off because it's sewed on tight to his clothing. And therefore he can go out without being concerned about walking with it, Daled Amos in the Rishus Harabim. In regards to Hilchos Tumah, if a bell has the inbal inside of it, the ringer, the clapper inside of it, it's able to be Mekabel Tumah. If it does not have the inbal inside of it, it cannot be Mekabel Tumah. A bell with its inbal that was already Tameh, if the inbal is taken out, it still remains Tameh. Says the Gemara Omar Mar, bringing back this last statement, Nitloi in Belehen, Adayin Tumosan Alein. If they take out the bell, the ringer from the bell, the inbal, then it still will remain Tameh. When that bell was already nitma, by taking out the ringer, the inbal, the bell still remains tameh. Ask the Gemara, Lamai chazu? Why is this chazu? In other words, we know that if a kli that was nitma, if it breaks and it's no longer usable, no longer fitting to be a kli, then it loses its tuma. So over here, why is it still tameh? Hooray, it's not usable for anything. Lamai chazu? Ask the Gemara. Since a simple person, a non-craftsman, could put back the inbal inside the bell very easily, it's considered to be a usable kli still, and therefore it does not lose its status as being tameh. Ask the Gemara, Masiv Rava, Hazug v'ha'inbal chibur. The Mishnah in Parah says that the bell and the clapper inside of it, that is a chibur, meaning to say that it's one kli. If the bell becomes nitba, because a mace, for example, comes in contact with the bell, then the clapper inside of it will also become nitma. And vice versa. If the clapper, the inbal, becomes nitma, the bell will become tameh. Also in regards to tahara, if the bell is sprinkled with the ashes of the Efer Parah, not only does the bell become tahor, but even the inbal will become tahor, and vice versa. So we see that it's one kli, mashma, that only because the inbal is together with the bell is it one kli. If you'll say this is the kavanah of this Mishnah when it says hazug va'inbal chibur, that is coming to say that even though it's not connected, meaning to say the inbal even came out, but nonetheless the bell still remains tameh if it became nitma beforehand. V'hatanya, the Gemara asks on this, if this indeed is the understanding of this Mishnah, misparois shall prokim, v'izmal shall rehidni, chibur letuma ve'en chibur lahazah. If you have scissors that have two different parts, two different blades, or you have a rehitni, an izmal shall rehitni, you have a blade of a craftsman, which also has two different parts, the blade, and it goes into the piece of wood. And it says over here that it's in regards to tuma, when one part, one blade becomes tameh, the other blade becomes tameh. And when one blade becomes tar, however, the other blade does not become tar. That's what it says in the Brisa. V'amrina, we ask, manavshach, whichever way you want. It's difficult. If it's a chibur, then why is it only tameh when the part that is nitma, the other part is tameh, but when it comes tahor, the other part is not tahor? V'lo chiburhu. And if it's not a chibur, then afilu letuma nami loy. Then even when it comes to tuma, it's not a chibur. Then one blade that becomes tameh should not be metameh the other blade. In other words, is this considered to be one kli or not one kli? V'omar Rabbi Dovar Torah b'shas malacha chibur bein letuma bein lahazor. Min haTorah, then we say that there's a chibur b'shas malacha, and therefore, if the scissors b'shas malacha become nitma, even one blade becomes nitma, the other blade becomes nitma. And if one blade gets sprinkled with the Efer hapara, then the other blade also becomes tohor. That's min haTorah b'shas malacha. Shaloi b'shas malacha eino chibur lo letuma v'lo lahazor. However, if the scissors are sitting on the side, lo b'shas malacha, and one blade becomes nitma, it does not metame the other blade. And similarly, if one blade becomes tohor as a result of the Efer para being metar, it does not metar the other blade. That's min haTorah. However, v'gazu al tuma shaloi b'shas malacha mishum tuma shehu b'shas malacha. The chacham were goyzer tuma on these scissors shaloi b'shas malacha, even when they are not being used. That saying that when one becomes tamei, the other one will also become tamei. Even though they're not being used now, and though it's still attached physically, they're not considered to be having a chibur, because the chacham were concerned that if indeed we say that it's going to then not metame the other part when it's not being used, then when it's being used, one will also say that the other part is not becoming tamei as well, and that's not true midiraisa. So they said l'chumra that even when it's not being used, we'll say that the second untouched part becomes tamei. And similarly, they were machmir v'alhazo. It says mishum shehi mishas malacha, mishum shahazo shelo b'shas malacha. And in regards to mitahering, making a hazah on the parts, the blade that became tamei b'shas malacha, that would normally midiraisa mitar the other part. The chacham said no, it does not mitar the other part. For the concern that if you would say that it is mitar the other part, then even shaloi b'shas malacha, one might make a mistake and say that the tahara on one blade will also mitar the other blade. Al kapani, what we have over here is clearly that it's considered to be a chibur gabe tuma, and therefore it's all considered to be one scissors. So too over here, when it comes to the bell and the clapper inside of it, that's what it means when it says there's a chibur. It's all one chibur, it's all one kli, whereby if one becomes tamei, the other one's nitma. And when one comes tohor, the other one becomes tohor. So how can the Gemara say that by a simple person being able to put a clapper inside retains the bell from its status of tuma, just because he can go ahead and replace the clapper? Elo Amarava, in other words, it doesn't have a chibur right now. So how can you tell me that the fact that the clapper is not inside of it still gives the bell the status of retaining its tuma? And that the Gemara answers, Elo Amarava hoyil veroi lahakisha al gabe cheres. Rava says no. It's true, when it doesn't have the clapper inside, it's still a kli, and that's why it remains tamei. Because you can take the bell and you can bang it, you can clang it against a kli cheres, and it'll make a bell sound. So therefore it's still usable, and therefore it retains its status as being tamei. Itmar nami, Amar Rabbi Yosi bar Chanina, hoyil veroi lahakoshoy al gabe cheres. He says the same thing, that indeed, says Rabbi Yosi ben Chanina, that since you can take the bell even without its inbal inside of it and bang it and clang it against a kli cheres, it still then will make a noise of a bell sound, whereby it still retains its status as something that is tamei. Rabbi Yochanan has another understanding why it remains tamei. Omar hoyil veroi legamea boy mayim letinok. It's still a kli because if you turn it upside down and put water inside of it, it's a good cup to go ahead and feed a child with, and therefore it's a kli that remains a kli and remains therefore tamei. Ask the Gemara, does Rabbi Yochanan really require indeed that does he did say that it can be used for another purpose than its original intended purpose as a bell? Ask the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan boy me'ein malacha rishayna. Does Rabbi Yochanan not require that the bell not keep its original malacha, but rather it can be used now as a cup, and that's satisfactory to retain its status as a kli that's tamei? V'hatanya, asked the Gemara from the following brayso, v'kol hakli asher yeshev alov. The pasuk says, all vessels that the zav will sit on it. Explains the brayso, yachol, I might think, kafa sa v'yashav alea, kafa tirka v'yashav alea yetame, that if you take a barrel the size that holds the measurement of a saw, or that which holds the measurement of a half a saw, and you turn it over, and the zav sits on that, you might think maybe perhaps that will also metame the chavis as a midras. Talmud loymar, therefore the pasuk comes and say, asher yeshev alav hazov, in the lashon of asid, that he will sit upon it. Explains the brayso, misha miyucha liyeshiva, it has to be something that he's sitting on that is normal for its sitting, namely a chair, a stool, a bed. All of those things would then become tamei midras from the zav. To exclude this case where we can say to the person, let us do our work, meaning we tell the zav, get up from the chavis, because we want the chavis to then now measure the wheat of a saw, as it did before. Rabbi Elazar Oimer, b'midrasos oimrim omo v'naseh melachtenu. In regards to midrasos, we do say that indeed it has to have its original status. In other words, it means to say that by a midras, in the case of the zav, if it's not a typical thing that a zav sits on, or lays on, or leans on, it cannot then become tamei. And therefore also, if indeed something that became tamei, that did have a status of something that's typically sat on, for example, let's say a bed, then it will become tamei. And Rabbi Elazar explains, if indeed we can go ahead and say to the person that let us do our malacha with this object, and it has its original malacha, thereby it will remain tamei in regards to the midras. However, mace amod tmei mace amod v'naseh melach ein omrim tmei mace amod v'naseh melachtenu. But in regards to tamei mace, if a mace, for example, were to then metame an item, whatever that item might be, for that we don't say it has to have its original destination as a whatever it was as a kli before to remain tamei. Rabbi Yochanan Omar, af oimrim betamei meis, omu v'naseh melachtenu. Rabbi Yochanan says that even in regards to tamei meis, whatever the meis was metame, there also it has to retain its original type of usage as it did before in order to remain tamei. So we see from over here that Rabbi Yochanan says that in order for a kli to remain tamei, he is the requirement that it has the same status, the same usage as it did before. So therefore over here as well, in regards to the bell, if the bell does not have the inbal in it, it would have to have some sort of original status, original usage as it had before in order to retain its status as tamei. So therefore, how can Rabbi Yochanan say that you can use the bell without the inbal as a cup, and since it's a kli, it retains its status as tamei? Answers the Gemara, ipuch kamaisa. Turn around the two opinions that we had before, that it's really Rabbi Yochanan who said indeed that you can take the bell without its clapper and bang it against the kli cheres to make the sound of a bell, and therefore it's sufficient to retain its status as a kli that remains tamei. Whereas Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina is the one who said that you can use it as a cup to fill up with water and feed your child with. Ask the Gemara, Umay chazis de ifchas kamaisa ipuch basraisa. Why did you see fitting to then switch around the original machloikis that Rabbi Yochanan said what he said before in regards to the saying that Rabbi Yochanan no longer holds that it's a cup that indeed is something that can be used, the bell is used as you can use as a cup, and we have to switch that around, say that really he does not require it be the same malacha, and switch around this opinion between him and Rabbi Elazar, and say he's not machmir, to say that it has to have the same designation as it originally did before. And then we can say that Rabbi Yochanan said in regards to the bell, it can be used as a cup like we saw earlier. Says the Gemara, no, because we see from somewhere else that indeed he is of the shita that you need to use the object for its original intended purpose. Because we hear from Rabbi Yochanan somewhere else that he requires to use this object for its original intended purpose. The Tanya, as it says in the Brisa, sandal shel behema shel mateches tamei. The Brisa says that a foot gear that is put on an animal, a metal foot gear to protect the animal's foot from getting damaged, that foot gear now still has the status as something that is tamei. It has the status of something that is tamei if it becomes nitma. Lamai Chazi asked the Gemara, what is it sufficient? What is it going to be used for? This mateches of a footwear, that it should be then considered to be a kli that remains tamei. Omarav roy lishtois b'mayim b'milchama. In the middle of a war, a person cannot find a cup, but he can take this kli, turn it over, and make a cup from it, pour water in, and drink. Rabbi Chanina Omar roy lasuch boy shemen b'milchama. Rabbi Chanina is of the opinion that he can turn it around and put shemen, put oil inside, then dip his finger in, and then rub his skin with the oil. Rabbi Yochanan Omar b'shah shebareach min akrav menicha beragla v'rotz al koitzim v'al habrar konim. Rabbi Yochanan says that a person in the middle of war can run away by putting these footwear on his own feet and run away and not become damaged from the thorns and thistles. So we see that Rabbi Yochanan indeed is of the opinion that it needs to have its intended use, original use, to remain tamei. So therefore it had to be that Rabbi Yochanan said earlier that a bell without the inbal inside of it indeed can be still used to clang and bang against a kli cheres and make a bell sound. Ask the Gemara on that which we just quoted, my bein Rav Rabbi Chanina, what is the difference between the first two opinions, whether you used the footwear that is a metal footwear either as a cup for water or a cup for oil? Ika beinayu demois. The difference would be if it became disgusting. According to Rav, if it became disgusting, you wouldn't be able to use it to then drink water from, and therefore would not be something that remains tamei. Whereas according to Reb Chanina, you can still use it for your oil. Then ask the Gemara, Bein Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina, the two latter opinions, between Rabbi Chanina who said you can use it as a cup for your oil, and Rabbi Yochanan who says they can use it for footwear to then run away and not be damaged by the thorns and thistles. What's the difference between these two opinions? Answers the Gemara, Ika beinayu di yakir. If it's going to be heavy, whereby it's not practical for a person to put it on his feet and run away because it's too heavy, then indeed it will not become something that remains tamei because not a viable kli.